To what extent was your interest in forming Anduril, a guy who created Oculus Rift, sold it for a couple $2 billion? Yep. To what degree was your desire to save the country some money a motivating factor?
It was a huge motivating factor. And the way to look at it, it's some combination of having better capability, because we desperately needed it, but then also saving money. And these two things actually go hand in hand. If you don't have efficient innovation and you don't have efficient product creation, you'll never be able to build the right tools to move forward. In other words, think about it this way. Spending money is really just a proxy for something else. In theory, you could just spend more and more and more on defense. And if it was only a matter of money, I'd actually be okay with it. Like, it wouldn't be great, but I'd find it hard for me to become passionate about it. It's hard for me to become passionate about something that's, just saving taxpayer dollars, as good as that is. But you have to remember that money is a proxy for something. It's a proxy for someone's time working in a factory, or for a building that had to be constructed that took 2 years to build, or for raw materials that had to be extracted from the earth, processed, turned into something else. And so when you're spending lots of money on something, ignoring, graft and fraud, it represents in some way the efficiency of a product. When a product costs us twice as much, it's because you're probably doing it costs twice as much as it should. It means it's twice as hard to build as it should be. And that was the thing that I was really worried about, because if you get into a war with another superpower, and let's say that you need to start making fighter jets fast enough to replace the ones that are being shot out of the sky, and you need to start building ships fast enough to protect not just us, but all our allies who are now at threat all over the world. Even if I have unlimited money, like let's say financially we can print unlimited money, there is not unlimited productivity in the country.
Right.
Even if you could somehow say, Palmer, here's $100 trillion for the defense budget, 100 times more. Well, that factory still takes 2 years to build. And that guy who was slowly building that wiring harness under a cost plus contract that incentivized him to do it slowly, he only knows how to build harnesses in that way, slowly. And then the materials, maybe we selected materials that are really hard to process, really hard to mine. Maybe we don't have enough reserves of them. And so saving money, like if I want to build something for a tenth of the cost, I'm figuring out how to build faster factories. I'm figuring out how to train people faster. I'm trying to, and now if I give myself that budget, I can actually do stuff. So yes, I care about the cost, but more as a proxy for productivity total, because that's what we actually need, is the ability to make this stuff if we need to make enough of it to win a war.
How big is your company?
We're about 4,000 people, kind of like full-time, truly internal people, actually maybe closing on 5,000. And then if you count contractors, people who are working with us part-time, people, if you count everything, it's over 6,000 people.
Where will you be in the pantheon of Raytheons?
Well, I mean, they're a lot bigger than us, but this gets back to what I talked about earlier, which is that money is a proxy for productivity, and so is people. It's possible for a company to have 10 times as many people and still be slower than the first company.
Sure.
And so I think we're definitely a lot smaller than the big guys. I mean, they have tens of thousands or like low hundreds of thousands of people if you count all the contractors working for them.
But the potential for you guys to scale.
The potential for us to scale is there because I don't need that many people to do what I do. A lot of what I do, for example, on the manufacturing side, a lot of it is automated. And it's not that we don't have any people who are doing manufacturing. We have thousands of people doing it. It's just we're augmenting them with technology so that each of them can fight with the strength of 100 men. Or in our case, build wiring harnesses with the strength of 1,000 men, or build composites or sensors or rocket motors. But that's going to be the key. What I would say is I don't measure the progress of my company that much in terms of the people. It's in our output. Like, what are we making? Are we successfully making AI fighter jets, robot submarines, rockets and munitions and missiles and self-aiming rifles and force fields? Like if we're making that stuff, I'm okay if my company isn't growing, if those people are becoming more and more and more capable.
Anduril or Anduril?
Anduril.
It's constantly mispronounced.
Pronunciation debates don't get settled by the company; they get settled by the general public. Eventually, people decide what something is called.
Well, can't we, in this case, defer to Tolkien? I mean, I'm assuming this is the
well, in that case,
the sword of power.
In that
right?
case, it's probably something more like Anduril, which is Elven. And so this is why I'm actually a fan of Anduril, which is closer to the Elven.
So you're a
Anduril.
Tolkien geek, full on?
Oh, I'm a huge Tolkien geek, but I'm a geek with a high enough charisma stat to know that you can't fight people to pronounce things the Elven way and still walk out of the room being a well-liked guy. So I've had to learn that.
Well, when you crack open the Silmarillion as your reference, right?
You have to recognize. Look, I'll debate it with other Tolkien nerds, but I'm not gonna. I don't need to fight about it with like CNBC when they call it Anduril.
Right.
I just say
Just let it go.
That's right.
You bet it is.
That's right.
It's
That's
like-
100%. You got to pick your battles.
What do you really do in a world where most of the wars are so determined by the size of the populations?
Well,
You have to do what Anduril is doing. You have to figure out a way to fight them autonomously.
Well, I mean, an important point that I often make to people is we have this time advantage on China where we were prosperous before they were. It's only an advantage in time. It's hard to imagine. Even talk to the most anti-Chinese, most racist guy you can think of.
Chuck?
But go find him and ask him, do you think, and he'll say, well, America's better per person than any Chinaman. And so that's why we're going to beat them in the long run. And what I would argue with them is it doesn't matter how convinced you are of American exceptionalism and superiority. How can a country of 500 million people in the long run outcompete economically a country of 2 or 3 billion people? You'd have to believe that each American is 6 times as productive or useful as each Chinese national. That doesn't seem likely. Even the most anti-Chinese person is not going to say that they're that different from us because they aren't. I found the quote. Here we go. By the way, I brought this up recently on Twitter in September because there's a lot of people who they look to Tolkien and they say, "Oh, I can't believe Palmer named his company after something from the Lord of the Rings. He doesn't understand the novels. They don't understand that Tolkien hated war, blah, blah, blah." But so do I. That's the whole point. Tolkien was not someone who was pro-war by any means. The things he saw in World War I, he made that very clear. But he did believe in good and evil, and he did believe in wars that needed to be fought. And he made very clear that those are the wars you need to focus on fighting. So here's the quote. This is from C.S. Lewis.
Mike Rowe here with a friendly reminder that my foundation has set aside millions of dollars to help train the next generation for a long list of AI-proof 6-figure jobs. What do those jobs look like? Well, most of them look like work. Electricians, plumbers, steam fitters, pipe fitters, welders, shipbuilders, linemen, all in demand like never before. Apply for a work ethic scholarship at microworks.org. Skip the debt. Get the skill. Go to work at microworks.org.
Almost the central theme of the book is the contrast between the hobbits, or the Shire, and the appalling destiny to which some of them are called. The terrifying discovery that the humdrum happiness of the Shire, which they had taken for granted as something normal, is in reality a sort of local and temporary accident. That its existence depends on being protected by powers which the hobbits forget against powers which the hobbits dare not imagine. And I think that describes a lot of Americans and a lot of American allies.
Sure.
They're being protected against powers that they forget, against forces they dare not imagine, and they forget that it is a local and temporary situation.
And you look at the map of Middle-earth, and you see where the Shire is.
That's right. It's far behind lines, and so you have the men of Gondor basically holding the line, fighting every day. And this one of the interesting themes also that I think that Tolkien understood. By the way, Tolkien hated allegory. I don't know if you know this. So it's very difficult to say this is an allegory for this.
Right.
It's more some of the themes around universally what is good and what is evil. You can tease out his worldview to some degree.
Because we take the times we live in and immediately juxtapose it to whatever the story is.
And it's not quite so simple.
Right. It's like they're not really Nazis, right?
But one of the interesting things that he does call out is is how you had this human nature for the people who live far away from Mordor to basically not believe any of these things. They literally don't believe in this invasion. They don't believe that these monsters exist. Contrast that with the men who are living literally on the front lines of this conflict. They are the last line of defense for the entire kingdom of man and everyone who lives behind them. They don't have the luxury of wondering if these things are real. They don't have the luxury of thinking that maybe evil doesn't exist. They're confronting it every day. And I think there's very similar analog to our modern military. You'll talk to people who say, oh, well, I don't think that anyone's truly evil. And I think that nobody deserves to die. Nobody deserves to die as a result of their actions. We need to bring these people, at worst, we need to try them and bring them to justice. There are a lot of people who have been on the front lines of conflicts who could never, they don't have the luxury of that. Yeah. Someone who's looked evil in the eye can't pretend, well, I think it doesn't exist, and really we shouldn't be killing anybody. There's nobody who deserves to die.
You get to be an isolationist.
That's right.
Because you're isolated.
That's right. That's right.
There's no isolationism in, Habsburg or the World War I Europe, right? You're like, you're sharing a border with everybody.
That's right.
And the knives are out all of the time.
Well, and I think, too, in World War II, we got a really good bit of immunity to these problems in that every family had someone who fought. I mean, almost without exception. The draft was so extensive and the number of volunteers was so broad.
There was a home front.
Exactly. And so people understood that we were fighting for something that mattered, that we were fighting for allies who mattered, that we were fighting a just war against a real foe. And I think that as those people have died off, we now live in a country where I think it's something like, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think it's less than a third of families in the U.S. have a family member who is in the military. And you wonder, what does that do to the character of a nation? It becomes much easier for a whole family of people to become, anti-military, not anti-war. There's a difference between these things. To become anti-military,
right,
in their pursuit of being anti-war. And it's because they don't know anybody who's actually been part of it. They don't know anyone who's been part of that, at least not directly. Maybe they did in their past, but they forget. There's a lot of kids today who can't remember 9/11. Do you really think that they're going to be remembering the lessons of World War II or World War I? This is why it's such an incredible quote where it
really
talks,
is.
A sort of local and temporary accident really describes the relative peace we've had since the end of World War II till now. It is a local and temporary accident that comes as a result of Pax Americana, this post-World War II era.
I've heard you say in various interviews that you'd much rather have our wars and battles being fought with the kind of hardware that you're creating. Better to have the gear over there than our blood and treasure.
That's right.
But you've also made the point, and I certainly agree with it, that if the country itself becomes disconnected from its military, either consciously or unconsciously, then we're not in the fight in the same way. And the more disconnected we get from the fight, the more likely it is the fight will come to pass. And if the goal is to avoid the fight, in the same way that our goal with cars is not to crash or get TMIs playing football, vis-a-vis all the unintended consequences and language that we've talked about, how are we to think about the positives of all the tech that's allowing us to fight without being there?
The U.S. needs to stop being the world police and start being the world's gun store. In other words, we shouldn't be sending our own people to die for other countries' interests. We should be giving them the tools that they need to maintain, their existence as a nation that the U.S. wants to be allied with. My analogy I prefer is to turn them into porcupines. You give them tons of surface-to-air missile defense systems, tons of local defense systems, and offensive weapons that make it where you just don't want to put this guy in between your teeth, because even if you could win, it's going to be so painful you're not going to want to. What you're talking about, not about the perils of becoming more and more likely to become involved in these wars as the people are pulled out. I think that's one of the reasons it's so important to stop being the world police and instead leave that decision as to whether to fight up to the people who are dealing with the consequences. So, like somebody in Ukraine, for example, they're not thinking about whether or not they'll fight on the basis of whether or not it's a robotic system or not, whether they're on the front line or the back line. For them, it's much more fundamental. It's actually a little bit like the pilot analogy earlier, looking at his family. They're fighting so that their country exists.
They're in it, man.
They
All
are.
in.
They are in it. I think that that's actually a very healthy motivation to fight. If you are fighting for the existence of your country and your family and your business and your culture, that's the person who should be deciding whether or not this is a life or death fight. It shouldn't be another country on the other side of the world fighting that for you. And then also, how does that country know when to stop fighting too, right? I think this is what we saw in the Middle East. We fought these wars in the Middle East long after the people we were supposedly helping wanted to be fighting them. And that's, of course, why the Taliban was able to come immediately back into power in Afghanistan, like within weeks of the U.S. pulling out. It's because the Afghani military that we were propping up, what were they fighting for, right?
We can't want your sovereignty more than you do.
Exactly. And we shouldn't be making that decision. And so I think these things go together. If you give people the tools that they need, I think that they're going to be motivated not by the fact that they have robotic weapons to fight or not fight. It's going to be about the existence of their countries. I think countries should generally not be making decisions about the prolonged existence or fighting decisions of another nation that is not their home. Like the U.S. shouldn't be deciding if Ukraine continues their war or not. And the U.S. shouldn't be deciding if Taiwan is going to defend itself or not. That has to be their decision.
Sure.
And I want to give them the tools that they can use to make that decision. I believe this partly is a moral thing, but I can make a very practical argument that I've had with the kind of realpolitik GOP side of things in particular, where they say sometimes we do need to go abroad and sometimes we do have interests that we have. And my point to them is we don't have the political capital to do that as a nation anymore.
Yeah.
America is done with it. We burned all of that credibility that we built up into World War II. We burned most of it during Vietnam, and we burned up the rest of it in the Middle East, fighting this war on terror. And you will not convince Americans to go fight another war, even if it is just. This is not a judgment on whether we should.
Yeah.
I would argue, I don't think that America could work itself up enough to go fight the Nazis again. I think that if it came to us, they said, we're going to have to lose a few million people and we're going to have to mobilize our whole economy. I think we literally don't have it in us. And that whether it's spiritually or morally or politically, whatever you want to call it, we will not be able to muster the political will or capital to make that happen. And so this is kind of the remaining solution, whether you want it to be or not.
Well, that worries me.
It worries me too.
It's worrisome.
I want America to be in a world where if there is a just reason to rise to the occasion, that we're able to. But I just don't think that we have it in us. And I don't think the kids coming out of modern schools, look at the kids who are on the beaches in Normandy on D-Day.
Yeah.
Do you think that we have a few million of those?
I do not.
That's the problem.
If you like what you heard,
And even if you don't,
won't you please,
pretty please, subscribe.
subscribe?
Well, I hate to beg and I hate to plead, but please